Tonight, you're not listening to thunder gods and heroic speeches. You're listening to delivery, the small, fast kind that keeps 9 worlds talking. Before you fall asleep, you'll climb the long spine of Yggdrasil with Ratatoskr, the messenger squirrel who runs between an eagle at the crown and Nihigra at the roots, carrying insults like sealed jars, never spilling, never sweetening. You'll see how gossip becomes infrastructure, how a rumor can cool a feud, how a well-timed word can start one, and how balance in Norse myth is sometimes just motion that refuses to fall. Frost pops on bark like tiny salt grains. Claws tick beads on wood steady, impatient, almost polite. Far above, a wing snaps once, sharp as a book closing. Far below, teeth grind in the dark, slow and patient, like a millstone that never sleeps. And between those two sounds, the trunk hums, a vertical road of sap and scars, keeping secrets in its rings. If nights like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share where and what time you're listening from, perhaps the next quick scratch of claws on bark will remember you there, half awake, while a message climbs past your head and drops as lightly as a pine needle. Because tonight's story doesn't begin with a battle. It begins with a courier small enough to be ignored, running hard enough to keep the world tree awake. You might not expect the fate of 9 worlds to hinge on a small animal with cold toes and a talent for repeating things, but that is exactly the kind of quiet engineering Norse myth likes to hide in plain sight. Frost pops on bark like tiny grains of salt. Claws tick like beads on wood. Far above, a wing snaps once, like someone closing a book with unnecessary confidence. Far below, teeth grind in the dark, steady and patient, like a millstone that never got the memo about bedtime. And in the middle of all that vertical silence, Ratatoskr begins to run, not because anyone asked nicely, but because a tree that holds everything tends to attract opinions. He starts low and works upward, or perhaps he starts high and works downward. Because with Ratatoskr, it is hard to say whether direction matters as long as there is movement. Yggdrasil is not a normal tree. It is not even an overachieving tree with ambitions. It is the kind of tree that accidentally became architecture. Its trunk is a road with no crossroads. A single long column of wood holding more stories than anyone agreed to read. Ratatoskr maps it the way small creatures map anything important, by taste, by texture, by warmth, by the tiny differences between one patch of bark and the next. He knows where the sap runs thicker, where the bark flakes like dry bread, where lichen gathers in soft pale patches that look like tiny tavern signs for those who cannot read but still want a place to stop. Every knot becomes a landmark. Every old scar in the trunk becomes a familiar doorway. If you were very sleepy and someone asked you for directions, you might do the same thing, describing your own room by the squeak in the floorboard and the cool spot on the pillow instead of saying north or south. There's rhythm to his climbing, and it is surprisingly gentle. Inhale on 4, exhale on 6, and suddenly height stops feeling like danger and begins to feel like distance, the way a long hallway feels less dramatic when you walk it slowly. He doesn't rush. He can't. The trunk is wide and old, and even a squirrel who thinks highly of his own schedule still has to respect gravity. He makes the work small, one grip, one step. One pause where his ribs press against the bark, and he listens to the tree's steady internal hush. In that pause, messages ride his ribs the way a folded note rides in a pocket. Replies ride his tail like a ribbon tied for later. The bark keeps their pace. It does not hurry him. It does not praise him. It simply exists, which is, frankly, the most supportive thing some large structures can do. He is called a messenger, but calling him that makes it sound noble, like he has a uniform and a plan. He does not have a uniform. He has fur that collects little crumbs of frost and sap, and a face that looks suspiciously like it knows something. He is also called a gossip, which makes it sound petty, like he is whispering behind someone's back about their antler choices. Both words fit in the way two different hats can fit the same head. Because what is gossip, really, but a message with extra seasoning delivered by someone who enjoys the delivery part a little too much? Ratatoskr doesn't invent the tree's problems. He moves them. He keeps them warm in transit. He keeps them sharp. And sometimes, yes, he keeps them slightly improved, the way a person might retell a story and quietly remove the boring parts. As he climbs, the world changes without changing. The air grows thinner, but the bark stays bark. The frost clings, but the sap still breathes under it. And far above, at the crown, an eagle watches. The eagle does not flap dramatically. It does not do anything dramatic. It watches the way an old manager watches a hallway, confident that everything is either under control or not worth controlling. There is even said to be a hawk perched between the eagle's eyes, which is an oddly specific detail, and the kind of detail you remember because it is just strange enough to stick. A bird on a bird, like a tiny hat made of feathers. Meanwhile, at the roots, a dragon named Nihigr files its anger on bone. The myth does not ask you to picture this as a chase scene. It is more like two stubborn neighbors at opposite ends of a tall building, one upstairs, one in the basement, both convinced the other is ruining the property value. Ratatoskr carries insults between them like sealed jars. He does not spill. He does not sweeten. He does not sanitize. He transports words the way the sea transports salt, by being in motion until everything tastes the same. He knows that one blink too long can become a bite, and one word too much can become a feud that lasts longer than a season. He knows how to leave a camp exactly annoyed enough to keep the tree awake, not furious, not violent, just awake. It's the emotional equivalent of tapping a desk with a pencil, enough to prevent a nap, not enough to start a war. And if that sounds like a surprisingly careful skill for a small squirrel, that is because mythology often assigns very serious jobs to very minor employees. Now he drops into the craft of moving words, because moving words is, in its own quiet way, a craft. Ratatoskr trims a story to 4 beats because 4 beats are easy to carry. Who, where, when, and the edge that will hook. He doesn't call it that, of course. He does not sit at a little desk writing hook strategies. He just knows that if the message is too soft, it slides off the listener like rain off a smooth stone. If it is too sharp, it sticks in the throat and becomes work. So he aims for that sweet, sleepy middle, where a detail is just odd enough to make the mind glance at it and then glide past. Names, for example, are heavy. Names catch on twigs. So he wraps names in nicknames, and the nicknames travel farther. He might call the eagle the one who looks down like it owns the view, and he might call Nifgr the one who chews like it's making a point. You can imagine him doing it with a straight face, which makes it funnier very quietly. A pause is part of the message too. Ratatoskr knows this. A pause lets a listener fill in their own meaning. A glance is the 5th line no skald writes, and Ratatoskr is not a skald, but he does understand the power of leaving something implied. In a way, he is the world tree's internal mail system, and like any mail system, it runs better when it is boring and consistent. Nothing is added, he tells himself. Nothing is fixed. Delivery is the weapon, not the script. Which is a very squirrel way of looking at it, because squirrels are practical and slightly dramatic about practical things. He doesn't have ink, so he uses scratches. He doesn't have parchment, so he uses bark. Scratches mark rendezvous. Comb piles mark urgency. Tail flicks mark price, or perhaps mood, because sometimes those are the same thing. He taps twice for truth, once for bait, and circles once if his claws have heard enough. It's like a tiny code system that pretends it isn't a code system, the way people will say, "I'm not a planner," while color-coding their calendar. Runes are for stones, because stones stay put and take engraving well. Squirrels prefer margins, thin, fast, deniable. A scratched mark can be blamed on weather. A cone pile can be blamed on hunger. A tail flick can be blamed on being, in general, a squirrel. Yggdrasil keeps the ledger in rings because trees record time the way they record everything, quietly by growing. Ratatoskr keeps it in steps. He remembers where he stopped, where he slipped, where he heard the eagle shift its feathers, where he heard the dragon's teeth scrape root like someone chewing with their mouth slightly open. It is not polite, but it is memorable. And because this is Norse myth, the whole system has a faint air of inevitability. The messenger is not a hero. He is a habit. He is the kind of habit a world develops so it does not fall asleep and collapse. And one of the softer ironies of the myth, Ratatoskr's job is to keep 9 worlds talking, and the method is irritation. A quiet rumor prevents a loud raid. A timely boast prevents a brittle oath. It is the same principle as sending a mildly annoying reminder email so nobody forgets the meeting and acts surprised later. Ratatoskr trades thunder for drizzle, letting tempers cool into manageable weather. Not sunshine, not peace. Just manageable weather, the kind of weather where you can still walk to the well without drama. Gods think they steer events, and perhaps they do, in their own grand way. Ratatoskr steers intervals. He decides when a message arrives, and timing is almost always the real power. A sentence delivered too early is panic. A sentence delivered too late is pointless. A sentence delivered in the middle when the listener is already a little tired becomes fate because tired minds accept things more easily. He saves ceilings the way a small wedge saves a heavy door from slamming. Balance is not peace, he learns. Balance is motion that refuses to fall, which sounds profound until you realize he is describing, quite literally, the act of running up and down a tree without dropping the jars. His economy is small and sticky. Honey is currency. Warmth is interest. Safe hollows are compound trust. These are the kinds of concepts that sound almost financial if you say them slowly, but they are really just the accounting of survival. For a crumb, he slows a quarrel. For a nest, he speeds a warning. For a comfortable nook, he might even soften an insult, not by making it kind, but by trimming the sharpest syllable. Debts gather like moss soft, persistent, hard to remove without tearing bark. The tree is full of soft places where old conversations grow quiet and then grow back again. Ratatoskr remembers who paid, who begged, and who pretended not to need either. That last group is always the loudest, not because they are dangerous, but because pretense has a habit of echoing. It would be easy to make this dramatic, to turn Ratatoskr into a trickster with a grand scheme. But the sleepy truth is that he is more like a courier with a personality. He likes the taste of attention. He likes the feeling of being needed. He also likes the feeling of being slightly superior to creatures who cannot climb. And in Norse myth, those are perfectly acceptable motivations. The cosmos does not always run on virtue. Sometimes it runs on mild pettiness and good cardio. After the run, the tree answers back. Not with words. Yggdrasil is not chatty in the human way. Sap rises, twigs tick. A root shifts like a slow animal testing a limb. These are the tree's messages, and they are so slow they are almost not messages at all. The eagle preens a little calmer. The dragon chews a little quieter. Some feuds roll over in sleep, the way a dog circles and decides the rug is fine after all. Others coil and wait for a warmer day, because some resentments are seasonal, and some are perennial, and the tree has room for both. The trunk records none of this in words, and all of it in growth. That is one of the gentlest lessons hidden in myth. You can spend your whole night listening to what was said, who repeated it, and who pretended not to care. Meanwhile, the tree simply adds a ring as if to say, yes, that happened, and now it's part of the wood. There is a kind of comfort in that if you let it be comforting. It means that even the noisy parts of existence become quiet eventually, not because they're solved, but because time covers them with another layer. Ratatoskr, for his part, has rituals because everyone with an ongoing job eventually invents rituals that make it feel bearable. Keep facts in one jar short, exact carryable. Keep heat in another cool, labeled, small. If a tale must travel, cut it to the truth you can sprint with before breath runs out. Arrive, deliver, leave. No lingering at nests that like your name too much. It's good advice for squirrels, and honestly, for humans with phones full of messages they don't want to answer. There is dignity in not hovering. His claws fold, his tail blankets, the tree hums. The night keeps talking without raising its voice. Somewhere high above, a feather settles into place with a sound too small to call a sound. Somewhere low below, teeth continue their slow work, as if chewing is a kind of meditation. And somewhere between root and crown, Ratatoskr stops for a moment, feeling the bark under his ribs, letting the cold sit on his whiskers like fine dust, letting the whole vertical world become one steady, unhurried column. If you're still awake, you can imagine him deciding what to carry next, choosing which words are light enough to hold, and which ones should be left where they fell, because not every thought deserves a journey. And if you're drifting off, you can let the tree keep its own ledger, ring by ring, step by step, story by story, without needing an ending. Have you ever noticed how a message changes just by being carried, how the same sentence can arrive warm or cold, depending on the hands that held it on the way? Ratatoskr knows this the way you know a blanket knows your shape. He doesn't just move words along Yggdrasil like a polite little postal service with a tiny stamp. He moves them like a living breath, like a small creature transporting heat through a house that is too large to warm all at once. The tree is spacious in the way an old building is spacious, full of long corridors, unexpected drafts, and the quiet sense that someone, somewhere, is always awake. And Ratatoskr, being Ratatoskr, takes that as a personal invitation to keep everything slightly, gently, inconveniently informed. He learned early that gossip is not one thing. It has edges, it has softness, it has weight. Some words are stones, and you can feel your paws ache just thinking about them. Other words are feathers, and they drift off unless you pin them down with a detail. The best gossip, the kind that travels from crown to roots without breaking apart, has a little hook in it, something oddly specific, and mildly unnecessary, like saying the eagle blinked twice before answering, or that Nighthaker chewed a particular root, the way someone chews the corner of a thought. You might not need that detail, but your mind grabs it anyway, the way your fingers find the one frayed thread on a sleeve. Ratatoskr trims stories into small bundles because he's practical, but he never trims away the little ridiculous bits because those are the handles. He also understands timing, which is, if we're being sleepy honest, most of what communication is. If you say something at the wrong moment, it becomes drama. If you say it at the right moment, it becomes weather. Ratatoskr prefers weather. He specializes in manageable drizzle. He carries a harsh line upward, but he lets it arrive after a pause, once the listener has had time to settle into their own irritation. He carries a boast downward, but he delivers it after the chewing has already slowed, when even anger is slightly tired. It's less stirring the pot and more tapping the pot very gently so it remembers it is a pot. Not heroic, not elegant, effective. If you watched him work for a while, and I do mean watched, in the slow way you watch a kettle take its time, do you notice the 4-beat shape of his messages? Not because he counts on his claws like a poet, but because long messages snag. So he keeps it to who, where, when, and the edge that will hook. Who said it, where they were when they said it. When it was said, morning, dusk, the hollow hour when everyone pretends they're asleep. And the edge, the one phrase that makes the receiver sit up inside their own mind. The edge is rarely the insult itself. It's usually something like, and they didn't even look up when they said it, or they said it like they were bored. In Norse myth, boredom is strangely powerful. It is the opposite of fear. It's the emotional equivalent of leaving someone on read, except with feathers and fangs. Ratatoskr wraps names in nicknames because names are heavy baggage. If he says the eagle, that's fine, but if he says the one who thinks the wind belongs to him, it travels farther because it is funny and is specific and it feels true even if it is unfair. If he says Niker, you might respect the proper noun, but if he says the root chewer who files his anger like a tool, the image sticks. It is not academic, it is not even polite, it is portable. And portability is the whole business model. He is like someone summarizing a long email thread into one sentence you can read on a lock screen, plus a tiny extra sentence that makes you sigh. There's also the pause. Ratatoskr is very good at pauses, which is impressive for a creature that is mostly legs and urgency. But a pause is part of the message. A pause lets the receiver supply their own dread, or their own smugness, or their own version of what was said. A glance is the fifth line no skald writes, and Ratatoskr is essentially a courier of glances. Sometimes he delivers nothing but a look. He stops, he breathes, he lets the silence hang, and the listener fills in the rest like a person reading a headline and inventing the article. If that sounds modern, it's because humans keep reinventing the same habits with new tools. Yggdrasil just does it with bark and breath. And because he has no parchment, he uses the tree itself as a notebook that can plausibly deny being a notebook. Scratches mark rendezvous. A set of shallower scratches means meet later because shallow things are patient. Deeper scratches mean now because deep things are urgent. Cone piles mark direction because cones roll a little before they settle, and Ratatoskr knows how to arrange them so they point without pointing. It's the soft art of suggestion, like leaving your keys on the counter so you don't forget them, then pretending you didn't plan it at all. Tail flicks mark price, or favor, or apology. He taps twice for truth, once for bait, and circles once if his claws have hurt enough. And the fact that he can do all this without ever admitting he's doing it is, frankly, his greatest talent. Runes are for stones. That's what the humans say, and they're not wrong. Stones are wonderful at staying still and holding meaning. Ratatoskr prefers margins thin, fast, deniable. A rune carved into bark is evidence. A scratch that could be from weather is plausible. A small pattern of nicks that could be from a rabbit's teeth is perfect. Even in myth, nobody wants paperwork. The tree already keeps a ledger in rings, slow and honest. Ratatoskr keeps his ledger in steps, quick and biased. The tree's record is time. Ratatoskr's record is momentum. One could argue both are forms of truth, just at different speeds. If you listen closely to this craft, you begin to notice that the delivery really is the weapon, not the script. The content of an insult matters less than the way it arrives. A harsh message carried gently becomes almost thoughtful, like criticism offered with tea. A mild message carried sharply becomes a spear. Ratatoskr can sharpen or soften with nothing but tempo. He can arrive panting and wide-eyed, and suddenly everything sounds like an emergency. He can arrive calm, grooming one paw, as if he has all the time in the world, and suddenly even a threat sounds like a rumor about the weather tomorrow. If you've ever received a text with no punctuation and felt your heart rearrange itself, you understand the principle. Ratatoskr is punctuation with a tail. There are moments, too, when he adds nothing, fixes nothing, and still changes everything by choosing what not to repeat. That is another kind of power, the quiet power of omission. Not a grand lie, just leaving one sentence down in a hollow because it felt too loud to carry. He is not a moral creature, exactly. He is not evil either. He is a messenger, which in myth often means useful, busy, and slightly untrustworthy in a way everyone has decided to tolerate. The worlds don't ask for a perfect courier. They ask for a moving one. And Ratatoskr, bless his little lungs, keeps moving. Sometimes he practices in small places before he makes the full run. He'll stop at a softer patch of bark where the sap has dried into a gentle amber ridge and test a rhythm. Inhale on 4, exhale on 6. It steadies him. It also steadies the message, because a message carried by a calm body arrives calmer. He'll press his cheek to the trunk, feel the faint vibration of the tree's living hush, and decide whether the next words should be carried like sealed jars, tight, untouched, or like open bowls spilling just enough to leave a trail. The sealed jar is insult. The open bowl is rumor. Rumor is more interesting, but it's also messy, and trees, despite their size, have a strong preference for cleanliness. And if you're wondering what Ratatoskr personally enjoys most, it is probably the little moment right before delivery, when he knows something the receiver doesn't. It's a small, private spark. Not exciting, just mildly satisfying. Like having a snack in your pocket and remembering it's there. He pads up to the eagle with a look that says, "You won't believe what I heard," even though the eagle very much will believe it, because the eagle already believes most unkind things about the root region. Then he pads down to Mykr with a look that says, "I didn't want to bother you, but," which is, historically, the beginning of most bothers. And the tree holds all of this while keeping its own face, which is, in bark terms, a very neutral expression. If he gets tired, and of course he gets tired, even cosmic messengers have legs he simplifies. He returns to the smallest codes, 2 taps, 1 scratch, a cone turned slightly. The myth doesn't show you these tiny mechanics, but it leaves enough space for them because Norse stories love systems. They love rules. They love the idea that the world is held together not only by gods and monsters, but by routines so ordinary they can be done half asleep. Ratatoskr's work is not a battle, it's night chores. It's carrying something from one end of a house to the other so nobody wakes up angry in the morning without knowing why. And the tree itself, in its endless patience, receives these tiny communications the way a large body receives a small pulse. It doesn't jump. It doesn't gasp. It simply adjusts. A twig settles. A hush deepens. Somewhere in its vast vertical corridors, a world hears a rumor and slightly changes how it breathes. That sounds poetic, but it's also practical. Breath is how you pace yourself in a long night. Breath is how you keep from turning a small thought into a large panic. Ratatoskr, for all his mischief, is oddly good at teaching that. Keep it small, keep it carryable, keep it moving. So he goes on, practicing the craft in motion. A message is folded into a shape that fits between his ribs and the bark. A pause is placed where it will be felt. A nickname is chosen for travel. A detail is tucked in like a pebble, just heavy enough to keep the whole thing from floating away. And as he runs, the worlds keep talking, not loudly, not dramatically, but in that steady, murmuring way of households at night when someone shifts in bed. Someone else sighs, and somewhere, in the quiet corridor between thought and sleep, a small courier decides what to carry next, and what to leave behind, and how to make the whole tree feel. For another little while, awake in the gentlest way. A strange thing about a world tree is that it doesn't really have neighbors. It has directions. Up is neighborly, down is neighborly, and everything in between is a long, slow corridor of bark where news travels the way warmth travels through a large house, gradually, unevenly, and with a few drafts that feel personal. And if you listen to the tree long enough, you start to notice that the 9 worlds don't just stay connected by great speeches or heroic meetings. They stay connected by smaller things. By a look that lingers, by a message that is delivered with the right softness so it doesn't spark, or with the right dryness so it doesn't stick. It's almost disappointing, in the calmest way, to realize that cosmic stability can hinge on something as ordinary as a rumor arriving 5 minutes later than it could have. Ratatoskr, of course, has built an entire lifestyle around that disappointment. He knows that a quiet rumor can prevent a loud raid in the same way a small snack can prevent a dramatic kitchen incident at midnight. Not because the rumor is noble, but because it gives everyone something else to chew on. A timely boast can prevent a brittle oath. 2, because if someone is busy polishing their pride, they're less likely to carve it into stone. This is not wisdom so much as it is practical emotional management, which is what most wisdom turns out to be once you remove the poetry. Ratatoskr runs along the trunk like a little administrator of mood, letting thunder become drizzle, letting temper cool into something like manageable weather. And if you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe or don't. Ratatoskr won't know either. He's busy and he doesn't even have a phone. He learns the politics of Yggdrasil the way you learn the layout of a dark room, by bumping into things gently, then remembering where they are so you can stop bumping in the future. Politics here isn't speeches or banners. It's traffic. It's timing. It's who gets to feel heard first. It's who gets to think a thought was their own. At the crown, the eagle watches with the calm, superior patience of someone who has never had to crawl through roots. At the roots, Negre files his anger on bone with the steady focus of someone who enjoys a task. In between, the trunk is full of small lives and passing presences, stacks that nibble, insects that work, sap that rises, and the faint sense that the tree is always keeping notes, even when it pretends it isn't. Ratatoskr's job, if you can call it a job and not a compulsion, is to keep the conversations moving just enough that no one falls silent in a way that becomes dangerous. Silence can be restful, but silence can also be a decision. When one world goes quiet toward another, it can mean they are thinking, or plotting, or simply sulking with the commitment of a long winter. Ratatoskr doesn't like committed sulking. He prefers flexible sulking, something that can be undone with a snack, a nap, or a well-placed bit of overheard nonsense. So he trades big thunder for small drizzle. He takes the sharp edge off a message by delivering it with a yawn in his voice, or he sharpens a dull message by arriving breathless and letting his eyes do the shouting while his mouth stays polite. This is how he steers events, if you want to give it a grand phrase. It's not steering like a ship in a storm. It's steering like nudging a sleeping person away from the edge of the bed without waking them. Quiet, careful, slightly selfish, very effective. Sometimes he carries the sort of rumor that sounds like it's about honor, but is actually about embarrassment. They said your feathers look thin today is not really about feathers. It's about the feeling of being seen. He laughed when you missed a bite is not about laughter. It's about the tiny sting of being measured and found imperfect. In myth, gods and monsters alike are strangely sensitive to being judged, which is comforting in the way it's comforting to learn that even ancient cosmic beings would also feel weird about a bad photo. Ratatoskr uses that sensitivity the way a cook uses salt, not too much, just enough to make people notice the flavor. And when they notice, they react. When they react, they stay engaged. When they stay engaged, the tree stays awake. The 9 worlds, from a distance, sound like a dramatic concept, but up close they are mostly schedules and needs. Someone needs warmth. Someone needs quiet. Someone needs a boundary. Someone needs a favor. Someone needs to pretend they don't need anything at all. Ratatoskr runs between these needs, and he begins to understand that peace is not actually the goal. Balance is not peace. Balance is motion that refuses to fall. It's the way you sway slightly when you stand still for too long, just to remind your body you're still in charge. Yggdrasil is always swaying in that invisible way, and Ratatoskr is part of this way. He keeps the tree talking so it doesn't lock up, because a locked-up tree is not a quiet tree. It's a tense tree, like shoulders held too high during sleep. And here is where the politics gets gently silly, because the currency on Yggdrasil is not always gold or glory. Sometimes it's honey, sometimes it's warmth, sometimes it is simply the knowledge of a safe hollow that doesn't drip when it rains. Ratatoskr understands currency in the way squirrels always understand currency. If it can be stored, it matters. If it can be carried, it matters more. A crumb can buy trust if it arrives at the right moment. A shared nesting spot can become interest. A small warning delivered quietly before anyone else knows to worry can become a favor that doesn't expire. And like any good economy, it is full of petty transactions that feel enormous to the ones involved, and politely ridiculous to everyone watching from a safe distance. If you imagine Ratatoskr stopping at a hollow to rest, you can almost see him doing the math without meaning to. He doesn't count in coins. He counts in owed. He counts in remembered. He counts in I can mention this later. He knows who has paid with kindness and who has paid with fear. He knows who begged, who pretended not to need either, and who offered something first so they could deny they were ever desperate. These are not heroic details, but they are the details that keep a place running. And because Ratatoskr is small, he notices small things. A god's tone, a dragon's chewing, an eagle's pause. The way someone says fine and means, I will remember this for 700 winters. Sometimes a tiny quarrel is started over something as simple as a crumb. A crumb is nothing, objectively. One could step on it and never know. But on a tree where travel is vertical and effort is constant, a crumb is also proof that someone was fed. Proof that someone cared enough to share. Proof that someone had extra. Ratatoskr can make a crumb into a story, and with the right story, a crumb becomes a kind of political statement. He gave it to you, Ratatoskr might say, and the receiver hears, you were chosen. Or Ratatoskr might say, he didn't give it to you, and the receiver hears, you were overlooked. It sounds childish, and that's because it is. But childishness is not the same as harmlessness. Childishness is simply honesty without the polite wrapping. He also understands that warmth is interest. Not metaphorically, literally. A warm hollow is safer. A warm patch of bark is easier on the paws. Warmth is the kind of resource that can feel like love, even when it isn't. So when Ratatoskr brokers favors quietly with no official announcement, he often brokers warmth. A safe hollow here, a warning about a draft there, a note about when the sap runs thick, so you can drink without traveling far. These are the sleepy details that never make it into grand poems, but they are the details a creature remembers when it curls up to sleep and wants the night to be simple. And then there's debt, which in the 9 worlds is not always a chain or a curse. Sometimes it is moss. Soft, persistent, hard to remove without tearing bark. Of course, Ratatoskr himself runs on debt and favors. He is constantly borrowing trust. Trust from the eagle who listens because it enjoys listening. Trust from Nygr who listens because it enjoys something else. The feeling of being offered attention without having to ask for it. This is the funniest part if you let it be funny, which you can softly. Even under the roots, where the dragon gnaws and the dark is thick, there is still vanity. There is still the quiet pleasure of being included. Ratatoskr can deliver an insult and still make the receiver feel important, simply by implying they were worth talking about. They mentioned you, he says, and for a moment, even anger feels like warmth. The gods, from their vantage points in the branches of myth, like to imagine they are steering everything. They like to believe they steer events the way a hand steers a horse. But Ratatoskr has watched long enough to notice that most steering is done by intervals, by waving, by choosing when not to speak. The courier steers intervals and saves ceilings, the ceiling here meaning the calm limit before everything spills. When tempers rise too high, they bump the ceiling and rain down as trouble. Ratatoskr tries to keep the rise slow, so it becomes fog instead. Fog you can walk through, fog you can ignore, Fog, you can pretend, is just weather and not a sign that someone is thinking bad thoughts on your name. Sometimes he will delay a message on purpose, not dramatically, just a little. He'll stop to groom. He'll stop to sniff a patch of sap that smells like the memory of summer. He'll stop to watch a beetle do its steady work and feel, in that watching, the calming truth that most of the world continues whether you panic or not. And that delay changes the message. It changes the receiver's state. A delay can be kindness. It can also be strategy. Ratatoskr doesn't separate the two as much as humans like to. For him, kindness is often strategy, because a calmer world is easier to run through. If you follow him into the deeper politics, deeper, meaning closer to the roots, where everything feels more serious because it is darker, you start to see how petty wars form. Not great wars, petty ones. Wars made of small slights and old grudges that have been chewed into a shape that fits the mouth. Nigre is said to gnaw the roots, and that is dramatic enough. But what is quietly interesting is the idea that even a dragon can be drawn into something like a feud. A feud is just a story that refuses to stop being told. Ratatoskr helps stories keep moving, but he also helps them keep living. He does not always differentiate between a story that comforts and a story that contaminates. He simply recognizes movement and participates. And yet, this is important for your sleepy mind. Nothing has to explode. In this world tree politics, things often settle. Feuds roll over and sleep. Others coil and wait for a warmer day. The eagle preens a little calmer. The dragon chews a little quieter, not because anyone has become virtuous, simply because even cosmic irritations get tired. Even anger needs a nap. Ratatoskr relies on that. He relies on fatigue as a stabilizing force, which is a very bedtime-friendly concept. If you can't fix a thought tonight, you can at least let it get sleepy. There are nights when Ratatoskr arrives at the crown and finds the eagle already in a mood that doesn't need help. The mood of someone who has decided that the whole world is beneath them and therefore not worth reacting to. That mood is like a thick blanket. It covers everything, it dulls everything, it makes words land softly and slide off. Ratatoskr takes advantage of it in the gentlest way. He delivers sharper information uphill on those nights because it will be absorbed without drama, like medicine mixed into honey. And then he runs down with the eagle's restrained response, something like a shrug, but with feathers, and delivers that downward where it will feel like an insult precisely because it is so mild. He didn't even care, Ratatoskr implies, and suddenly the roots feel a little warmer with indignation. Then there are nights when the roots are in a calm chewing rhythm, the kind of calm that can be mistaken for peace. Ratatoskr is careful on those nights. He doesn't want to break a good rhythm, so he brings softer rumors down. He brings small, manageable things. The upper branches creaked in a strange way, he might say, which is not really information, but it becomes a small reason to keep an ear open. Or he brings a tiny compliment dressed as an insult, because compliments are suspicious in the 9 worlds. They said you're relentless, he says, and the receiver hears. They fear you. And perhaps that is enough to keep everything stable, because fear is at least a form of respect, and respect is a form of order, and order is a form of sleep. Ratatoskr doesn't set out to be a politician. He sets out to run. But when you run between powerful beings long enough, you become a kind of hinge, not because you are strong. Because you are present, you are the thread that keeps being tugged. You become the thing that proves someone else is still there. And that presence becomes its own power, quiet and irritating and necessary. The tree keeps a ledger in rings. Ratatoskr keeps it in repeated visits. The ledger says, I was here. And in a large living structure, I was here is half of continuity. If you want a small modern analogy that won't wake you up, think of him as a group chat that never sleeps. Not the chaotic kind with shouting and memes at 3 in the morning, though sometimes he has that energy. More like the group chat where somebody always replies, noted, and somehow that keeps the project alive. Ratatoskr is noted, but with claws. He is just so you know, but with a tail. He is FYI, echoed through bark. And here, slowly, the politics begins to feel less like manipulation and more like housekeeping. A quiet rumor prevents a loud raid. A timely boast prevents a brittle oath. A small favor keeps a safe hollow open. A warm patch of bark becomes interest. Debts gather like moss, and moss, if it stays soft, can be comforting. The tree continues. The worlds continue. The courier continues. No one resolves anything fully because resolution is loud and final, and Ratatoskr does not do final. He does ongoing. He does repeatable. He does we'll see, which is a very sleep-friendly phrase when you let it be. So he keeps running, not in panic, but in routine. He carries the gentle weight of other people's words and decides, in the quiet space between steps, what tone they should have when they arrive. He measures distances and breaths. He measures moods and pauses. He measures favors and warmth. And the world tree, patient and enormous, accepts all of it, not as drama, not as destiny, but as the soft, continuous chatter of a living structure that refuses to fall asleep completely and yet never raises its voice. Not even when the messages are sharp, not even when the grudges are old, not even when the moss gets thick, because in the end it is still a tree. Still growing, still humming, and Ratatoskr is still small, still moving, still delivering the kind of politics that feels from far away like myth and from close up, like a slow night of ordinary thoughts drifting back and forth until they finally begin to blur at the edges. After all that running, there is always a moment that feels strangely domestic, as if the world tree is a house and someone has just come home and taken their boots off very carefully, trying not to wake anyone. You'd think a cosmic messenger would end with thunder, or a dramatic announcement, or at least a small ceremonial trumpet that politely clears its throat. But Ratatoskr's work doesn't end with noise. It ends with the tree answering back in the quietest ways, the ways you only notice when you're already slowing down, when your thoughts are softer at the edges and your body has begun to believe it might be allowed to rest. The first answer is not a sentence, it's a change in texture. Sap rises, not urgently, not in a hurry to prove anything. It just moves the way warmth moves through a mug you've been holding too long, slow, steady, patient. Twigs tick. A root shifts like a slow animal testing a limb. The movement is so small you might miss it, but Yggdrasil is the kind of thing that makes a living out of small changes. Even its stillness has layers. And somewhere up in the crown, the eagle does something almost disappointing in its simplicity. It preens, not as a grand symbol, just as a creature who lives in feathers and finds it soothing to put them back in order. Down at the roots, Nightgate keeps chewing, but the chewing becomes a little quieter, as if the dragon has decided the night doesn't need an encore. That is one of the calmer truths of this place. Even the things that gnaw can sometimes gnaw softly. Even resentment can practice indoor voice. Ratatoskr, coming to a stop against the bark, feels it through his paws first. The tree has a pulse that isn't exactly a heartbeat, more like a schedule. A rhythm of now and later and not yet. When sap rises, when a root shifts, it's the tree's way of saying, yes, I heard you, and no, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. It's almost funny, in the driest way, that after all the messages and insults and careful deliveries, what actually changes the atmosphere is growth. Not a decision, not a speech, growth, a ring quietly adding itself, a new thread of sap making a slow path. If you ever needed proof that the universe has a boring side, here it is. The world stabilizes by thickening its own wood. Ratatoskr, who has hauled gossip like jars up and down this trunk, gets briefly outshone by a tree doing the tree equivalent of just give it time. And time, unfortunately, is very effective. You can picture him pausing in one of the safe hollows he knows so well, where the bark curves inward and the wind isn't quite as nosy. The hollow is lined with soft things, moss that has learned to be gentle, bits of shed feather, maybe a stray tuft of fur that no one admits belongs to them. Ratatoskr's tail makes its own blanket without asking permission. If you're listening in a modern room, you can borrow the feeling. The way a corner of a blanket becomes the official corner, the way your body decides without consulting you that this is the side it prefers. The tree has preferences too. Certain hollows are warmer. Certain ridges are better for gripping. Certain patches of lichen taste like old rain and calm decisions. And the deeper answer, the one that feels like the tree responding in language, is that the feuds don't always stay awake. Some grudges roll over and sleep the way a dog does when it finally gets bored of guarding the door. Others coil and wait for a warmer day, because even anger has seasons. Ratatoskr has seen it happen enough times that he trusts it. He trusts tiredness. He trusts distraction. He trusts the way beings will postpone drama if they can find a reason that feels respectable. Sometimes the reason is it's late. Sometimes it's the sap is running. Sometimes it's I have a feeling. And sometimes it's simply that the tree, massive and indifferent in its kindness, refuses to reward shouting with anything interesting. If you listen closely, the tree's answer is also in what doesn't happen. No sudden snapping, no ring of steel, no great stirring of 9 worlds into a new mood. Instead, the trunk records none of this in words, and all of it in growth. That is the funniest insult the world tree can offer to anyone who wants their feelings to be historic. It refuses to write them down. It simply absorbs the day into wood. It turns conflict into compost. It turns gossip into a faint change in the way the air smells near a certain branch. It turns a messenger's exhausting effort into the kind of quiet that looks from far away like nothing happened at all. Ratatoskr, being Ratatoskr, still wants credit, not loudly, just privately. He wants the satisfaction of thinking, yes, I nudged that. I steered that interval. I prevented that ceiling from bursting. And maybe he did. Maybe a rumor arrived late enough to become fog instead of lightning. Maybe an insult arrived soft enough to become a sigh instead of a strike. It's hard to measure, though, because the tree doesn't clap. The tree doesn't post a thank you note. The tree just keeps standing. If you've ever done a lot of effort only to receive silence, you know the feeling. It can hurt unless you reframe it. Ratatoskr has learned to reframe it the only way that works in a place like this. Silence means success. Silence means nothing caught fire. There's another soft answer too, a practical one. The animals around the trunk keep doing their small rituals. The stags nibble. The insects continue their diligent, almost ridiculous labor. Birds tuck their heads. Something tiny rearranges pine needles like a librarian who never sleeps and never complains. The world tree is full of creatures with jobs that don't get poems, and yet those jobs keep everything breathable. Ratatoskr watches them and feels briefly like the most dramatic person in a room full of professionals. He is the courier who runs like a headline. They are the slow workers who make the paper. And because his whole life is delivery, he cannot help turning the tree's answers into a kind of rule. A bedtime rule, almost. Keep facts in one jar, he thinks. Short, exact, carryable. Keep heat in another. Cool, labeled, small. It's not an ancient Viking proverb etched in stone. It's more like a personal system for staying less anxious, which is honestly what most proverbs are when you take away the heroic font. Ratatose likes jars because jars don't leak. He likes containers. He likes boundaries. He likes the idea that you can put an idea away and it will stay there until you re-ready, instead of sloshing all over your insides like a spilled drink. If a tale must travel, cut it to the truth you can sprint with before breath runs out. That is another rule he lives by, and it sounds noble until you remember he is, at heart, a squirrel. A squirrel knows that caring too much is how you fall. Caring too much is how you get caught. Caring too much is how you drop the only thing you truly needed. So Ratatoskr trims messages the way someone trims their nails, not to become beautiful, but to avoid snagging on everything. He does not like lingering. Lingering is how arguments grow legs. Lingering is how attention becomes a trap. Arrive, deliver, leave. No lingering at nests that think you're talking too much. It's not rude. It's survival. It's also quietly good manners. The tree seems to hum in agreement, not because it cares about etiquette, but because it is full of nests, and every nest has a limit. Every creature has a threshold where a conversation stops being soothing and starts being sticky. Ratatoskr has learned to feel that threshold the way you feel when someone stands too close in a line. No one is attacking you, but your skin has opinions. So he keeps his deliveries clean. He keeps them short when they need to be short. He keeps them soft when they need to be soft. He keeps them deniable when they need to be deniable, because deniability in a world of gods and monsters is a kind of blanket. Even his claws have their own quiet discipline. Claws fold, tail becomes a blanket. The bark, warmed slightly by his body, holds the shape of him for a moment like a memory. He listens to the trees breathing sap up, sap down, a slow internal tide. He listens to the eagle above, feathers settling with that faint, fussy sound that is somehow both arrogant and comforting. He listens to the root world below, where chewing continues, because some habits are old and some jobs never end, but the volume stays low, and low volume is a kind of mercy. There is humor here if you want it, and you can want it gently. Ratatoskr, the great courier of the worlds, ends his night as a small warm lump pressed into bark, trying to make himself as uninteresting as possible so the universe doesn't ask him to do more. He is like someone who has sent too many emails and now wants to turn off notifications with religious devotion. And the tree, enormous and patient, does not demand a conclusion. It doesn't ask for a final summary. It doesn't want a tidy ending. It just wants to keep growing without being interrupted by unnecessary drama, which is a desire I suspect you can relate to. In your own human way, lying there with your lights low and your mind trying to stop producing footnotes. So Ratatoskr makes himself a small oath, the kind you don't announce, the kind you whisper into fur and forget you ever promised. Facts in one jar, heat in another. If the message must travel, keep it light enough to run with. If the mood rises too fast, make it drizzle. If the world feels loud, aim for something boring and repeatable. Not because boring is bad, but because boring is stable. Stable is safe, safe as sleep. And the tree answers, again, not in words. It answers by staying up, by staying rooted, by letting the night keep talking without raising its voice. Sap rises, twigs tick. The root shifts once more, testing itself, then settling. Somewhere in the branches, a feather loosens and floats down like a slow thought you don't need to catch. Somewhere below, the chewing pauses for just a beat and inhale, an exhale, and then resumes at a quieter pace, as if even the gnawing has agreed to be considerate. Ratatoskr closes his eyes, but his mind continues its small, soft habits. He catalogs hollow locations. He remembers who owes whom a crumb, who owes whom warmth, who owes whom an apology they'll never call an apology. The ledger sits in his head like a nest of small labeled things. He doesn't solve it. He doesn't resolve it. He just keeps it arranged well enough that it won't fall apart during the night. And if you listen long enough, the whole world tree starts to feel like that, a place where nothing is concluded, but everything is placed gently back where it belongs. A rumor tucked away, a boast folded, a fear written smaller, a message trimmed to what can be carried, claws folded, tail blanket, bark warm. The night hums in its steady, unbothered tone. The tree keeps talking, not loudly, just endlessly. A living structure full of small motions that refuse to become drama. And Ratatoskr, still a little warm against the trunk, still a little restless even in rest, lets the words he didn't deliver drift off into the bark, as if the tree can store them in its rings, not as history, not as proof, but as the faintest impression of a busy little courier finally going quiet, while above and below the long vertical world continues awake enough to grow, calm enough to soften, patient enough to keep everything in motion without falling, and gentle enough, if you let it, to blur into the kind of quiet that doesn't end so much as it simply keeps going, slower and slower, until even the idea of running feels far away. You might not expect the peace of 9 worlds to depend, even a little, on a squirrel's timing, but it does. Not the heroic kind of peace, with banners and speeches and dramatic sunsets. The quieter kind. The kind that happens when a sentence arrives a few minutes late and turns into a shrug instead of a challenge. The kind that happens when a rumor is delivered gently enough that it lands like dust, not like a thrown stone. And if you're listening from somewhere soft and dim right now, you can let that idea settle in with you. The world stays intact, sometimes because something small runs interference between bigger tempers. Ratatoskr learned very quickly that it's not the message alone that matters, it's the interval. It's the pause. It's the way you step on the bark between one knot and the next, choosing not to make it sound like a drum. He knows the trunk so well that he can tell time by texture. Smooth bark means you're higher up. Rougher bark means you're closer to the living mess of roots. And every notch, every lichen patch, every scar left by something older than memory becomes a kind of clock face. He can pace a delivery by counting breathing the way you might count to calm yourself at night. Inhale on 4. Exhale on 6 until even height feels like distance, not danger. It helps that he doesn't carry things like a hero carries things. He carries them like a professional. Short, sealed, and not leaking. If you've ever carried a cup of tea across a room while pretending you're not nervous, you understand his whole philosophy. Keep the surface calm, don't slosh, don't spill. A spilled message is how you get a feud with legs. A spilled message is how you wake the tree at the wrong moment. And waking Yggdrasil at the wrong moment is like waking a very large household in the middle of the night. Everyone remembers. Everyone has opinions. No one says it's fine and means it. So when Ratatoskr talks about keeping 9 worlds talking, he doesn't mean chatting in a friendly way. He means preventing silence from turning sour. He means making sure the worlds don't misunderstand each other into something sharp. Because in a place like this, silence is not always calm. Sometimes it is just a pause where a bad idea is putting its boots on. Up in the crown, where the eagle sits with a kind of calm only achieved by being very high up and pretending you above everything, messages have a certain flavor. They're airy, cutting. They arrive with the expectation that the receiver will be impressed. The eagle likes to be right in a way that has feathers. Down at the roots, where Nygr works its teeth into old wood, messages are heavier. They have weight. They have a chewy bitterness, like bark that's been in the rain too long. And Ratatoskr runs between those two moods all night, like a courier in a building where the top floor is silent and frosty, and the basement has a broken hum that never switches off. It would be very easy to make things worse. That's the absurd part. The universe has entrusted a crucial job to someone who could absolutely choose chaos with almost no effort. Ratatoskr could inflate a phrase. He could deliver the insult with a little extra spice. He could accidentally emphasize the part that stings. And sometimes he does, because he is a squirrel, and squirrels are not saints. But most of the time, the real craft is in the restraint. He trims the message. He wraps it in nicknames so it travels without breaking in the wind. He keeps it exact enough to be believable, but not so exact that it becomes an invitation to argue about footnotes. It's a kind of politics that feels almost modern in a sleepy way. Like managing a group chat where everyone is convinced they are the main character. Like working in an office where the email subject line is urgent, and the word urgent has lost all meaning. Ratatoskr's job is to keep the subject line from becoming war. So he does what any tired person does in a tense house. He lowers the volume. He trades thunder for drizzle. He takes the big hot weather of pride and turns it into something manageable, something you can live under without rearranging your whole life. He knows which worlds bruise easily. He knows which ones are always hungry. He knows which ones love rules and which ones love pretending they don't. He knows the worser and their bluntness, and the gods and their long memories, and the humans and their habit of making everything sound like it matters more than it does. He knows that the dwarves might take offense at a poorly chosen metaphor, and that the elves might take offense at the wrong kind of light. He knows that Hell's Realm doesn't need dramatic updates, just accurate ones. And he knows, most important of all, that nobody likes being told what to do by a squirrel, so he never frames anything as advice. Instead, he frames it as information, as a small carryable fact. He delivers it like a pebble set gently on a windowsill. If they pick it up and throw it, that's on them. His paws are clean. His tail looks innocent. His eyes, when he's being strategic, are just wide enough to suggest he is too small to be blamed for anything bigger than a misplaced acorn. Even the tree can feel his technique. Yggdrasil is not a judge, exactly, but it is a system. It responds to motion. It responds to patterns. When Ratatoskr runs too fast, the bark warms under his paws. When he pauses too long, the hollow's air changes, as if the tree is shifting its attention like someone turning over in sleep. And Ratatoskr learns to move in a way that keeps the tree steady, not too loud, not too urgent. He learns that balance is not peace. Balance is motion that refuses to fall. That's what keeping 9 worlds talking really is. Refusing to fall. Refusing to let one loud mood tip the entire structure. Refusing to let a single sharp sentence become a permanent feature. Ratatoskr watches how quickly things harden when they're repeated. He watches a rumor become a truth simply because it was moved often enough. He watches a boast become a prophecy because it was delivered at the right time, when someone's pride was already awake and looking for a job. So he pays attention to timing the way a baker pays attention to heat. Too early and the bread collapses. Too late and it becomes a brick. And nothing ruins a night like trying to chew a brick of regret. Sometimes his work looks almost boring, which is perfect, because boring is safe. He runs the same routes. He touches the same knots. He pauses in the same hollows. He rechecks the same marks, the way you might check your door lock twice. Not because you forget you checked, but because the gesture itself is calming. There are scratches in the bark that mark rendezvous points. There are cone piles that mark urgency. There are tail flicks that mean price, which sounds ridiculous until you remember that every world has its own currency, and the simplest currencies tend to last the longest. There are also codes that are not quite language, more like habits. 2 taps for truth, 1 tap for bait. A circle in place if claws have hurt enough. If you're human, you might recognize the feeling in your own life, the small signals you use when you don't want to say everything out loud. The glance across a room, the pause before you answer, the way you put your phone face down to tell the world you're done with it for a minute. Ratatoskr has a whole system built out of those tiny refusals, and the funny thing is, it works. Not perfectly, because nothing does, but enough. Enough to steer events, enough to save ceilings. If you want to imagine what saving ceilings means in a world tree, it's not always literal wood splintering. It's the feeling of a space staying livable. It's the way the air in a hall stays breathable. It's the way a conversation doesn't tip into shouting. The worlds have ceilings the way people have patience. They can be cracked, they can be patched. They can collapse if you forget they exist. Ratatoskr's job is to notice when patience is thinning and to deliver a message in the shape of a distraction. A timely boast prevents a brittle oath. That is one of his favorite tricks, because oaths are like ice. They look strong until a warm breath passes over them, and then everyone is surprised that something cold and rigid didn't handle reality well. Ratatoskr has seen enough brittle oaths shatter to become careful with them. If someone is about to swear something dramatic, Ratatoskr nudges them with an easier story. He offers something that allows them to save face without committing their whole future to a sentence said at midnight. A quiet rumor prevents a loud raid. This one is more delicate because rumors are like smoke. They spread into places you didn't intend, but Ratatoskr has learned where to release them so they thin out instead of thickening. He drops them near the edges of attention where they can be noticed without being worshipped. He doesn't want to start fires. He wants to cool rooms. He wants to make the hot world of pride feel slightly damp, slightly inconvenient, as if the weather has turned and suddenly no one wants to go outside and fight. Sometimes he even uses kindness, which surprises him every time. He will phrase a message in a way that gives the receiver an exit. He'll create a path where they can step back without looking weak. Because weakness in the politics of gods and monsters is often just exhaustion with bad marketing. And Ratatoskr, for all his mischief, has a soft spot for exhaustion. Exhaustion is honest. Exhaustion is the one feeling that doesn't try to impress anyone. He also knows how to let tempers cool into manageable weather. A storm is dramatic. A drizzle is annoying. Most people, and most gods, if we're being honest, would rather talk in a drizzle than in a storm. Drizzle gives you an excuse to stay under shelter. It gives you a reason to postpone. It gives you something to complain about that isn't personal. Ratatoskr will happily give anyone a reason to postpone, because postponement is basically half of diplomacy. The other half is snacks. And if you're still awake right now, you can take a tiny note from Ratatoskr, not the gossip part, the timing part, the part where you let things arrive gently. You don't have to resolve every thought tonight. You can deliver it to tomorrow with the corners folded. You can trade thunder for drizzle in your own head. Nobody needs a dramatic oath to the ceiling at 2 a.m. Your ceiling has been through enough. Of course, Ratatoskr is not doing this out of pure altruism. Let's keep the humor honest. He likes being needed. He likes being the only one who can run the whole trunk without losing his mind to the height. He likes the sensation of importance that comes from being small and fast in a system full of large, slow beings. He likes knowing secrets. He likes that the tree hears his footsteps and doesn't shake him off. And he likes, maybe most of all, that he can influence the mood of the entire structure without anyone being able to prove it was him. That's the safest kind of power, the kind that looks like movement, the kind that can be explained away as just a squirrel. If something goes wrong, he can always claim he was only carrying what he was given. He was only passing along. He was only doing his job, which is technically true, in the way that technical truths are often the most irritating. But tonight, he's careful. Tonight, the 9 worlds are in one of those moods where everything feels one insult away from becoming a permanent story. You can feel it in the bark. It's tighter. The sap is slower. The air in the hollows is restless, as if the tree is trying to decide whether to dream or to stay half awake. Ratatoskr's claws tick like beads on wood. His breath keeps the rhythm, in on 4, out on 6. He counts because counting keeps the mind from wandering into sharper rooms. He stops at a ridge where the bark curves like a whip, and he listens. Up above, the eagle is awake, not frantic, just alert. It has that sharp, tidy kind of attention that comes with being responsible for the sky view. Down below, Nahitra is awake too, but its attention is heavier, as if it's always chewing on something, even when it isn't chewing on anything. Ratatoskr can taste the difference in the air, The crown smells like cold feathers and distant wind. The roots smell like damp wood and old resentment softened by time. He chooses his words like he chooses his path. He doesn't sprint the whole way. He knows when to slow down so a message doesn't arrive with panic built into it. He knows when to pause so the receiver has space to hear it without reacting. He knows, too, that a pause is part of the message. A glance is the fifth line no scald writes. Delivery is the weapon, not the script. That line always makes him feel vaguely proud, as if he is an artist and not, fundamentally, a furry tube for information. But in a place like this, art and survival are always mixed together. A good delivery can keep someone alive. A bad delivery can get him bitten. And Ratatoskr doesn't want to be bitten. It's not that he fears death in some grand philosophical way. He fears being held in someone's mouth for even a second, like an unpleasant thought you can't swallow or spit out. So he keeps the worlds talking. He keeps the channels open. He keeps the misunderstandings small enough to be managed. He keeps the feuds from becoming formal. He keeps the tree from having to choose sides. And the tree, quietly, rewards this by continuing to hold him, by continuing to provide bark under paw, by continuing to hum in that low, unclaimed way that makes every world feel stitched together, not by a single heroic act, but by endless small ones. Sap rises, twigs tick. A root shifts like a slow animal testing a limb. The night remains the night, not solved. Not concluded, just held. Ratatoskr runs again, but softer now. Not because he's tired, though he is. Not because the job is done, because it never is. He runs because movement is the only way the worlds stay in contact. And contact, for all its annoyance, is better than the silence that grows teeth. He carries another message, and another after that. He trims, he wraps. He times. He lets some words dry out before he delivers them so they don't stain. He lets some words arrive slightly late on purpose, the way you let soup cool so it doesn't burn. He chooses drizzle. He chooses manageable weather. He chooses the kind of boring stability that keeps ceilings intact. And as you listen, you can let your own thoughts do the same. Let them travel lightly. Keep them in small jars. Deliver them tomorrow. Tonight can be for breathing, for bark and sap and slow, careful motion. Tonight can be for a world that doesn't mean an ending in order to keep going. For a creature about the size of a winter glove, Ratatoskr carries an astonishing amount of invisible paperwork. Not scrolls, not runes carved into stone. Just the soft accounting that lives in glances, pauses, and the careful way someone offers you the warmer spot inside a hollow. In the world tree, favors do not fall to the ground and disappear. They get caught in bark. They settle in seams. They wait like a scent that refuses to leave your fur. And because Ratatoskr runs the long vertical roots that stitch crown to root, he becomes the one who feels those favors tug when he passes, like threads snagging on his ribs. If you listen closely, you can hear the system working. Not the sound of coins, but the quieter sound of exchanges. A cone placed neatly at the edge of a root, as if it were a signature. A scratch that means, I remember you. A smear of honey on a knot, not enough to be a feast, only enough to be a message. Honey makes a good currency in a tree because it behaves like a secret. It is sweet, it is sticky, it attracts attention. It is hard to deny once it touches your tongue. Warmth, on the other hand, is interest. Warmth is what you pay later, without words, by sharing a corner that blocks the wind. Warmth is compound. It grows if you keep it in the right place. Ratatoskr learns early that safe is not a fixed thing. A hollow is not just a hole. It is a promise, renewed every night, that nothing with bigger teeth has claimed it today. One safe hollow becomes trust. 2 become habit. 3 become a tiny institution, complete with unwritten rules, and the kind of passive aggression that only appears when everyone knows everyone else is business. The tree is full of small communities who know each other the way neighbors do, fondly, suspiciously, and with an impressive memory for who borrowed what during the last storm. If you've ever lived in a building where you can hear someone's kettle through the wall, you already understand the vibe. The funny part is that no one calls it an economy. No one stands on a branch and announces quarterly results in a calm, professional voice. It all happens in tone. It happens in how long you let someone speak before you interrupt. It happens in whether you say a name with warmth or with the polite chill that means, yes, I have not forgotten. Ratatoskr, living in the middle of all these tones, becomes a kind of moving receipt. Sometimes he feels like a courier. Sometimes he feels like an accountant in a fur coat who never asked for the job and keeps doing it anyway because everyone assumes he likes spreadsheets. He does not even know what a spreadsheet is, and yet spiritually he is one. Because he is a messenger, Ratatoskr learns a quiet rule. Most favors are not really about the favor. They are about the story attached to it. A crumb can be generosity or insult, depending on how it is offered. A warning can be kindness or control, depending on how quickly it arrives. Ratatoskr can change the meaning of a thing just by choosing when to deliver it. Too early and it sounds like interference, like you were eavesdropping with enthusiasm. Too late and it sounds smug, as if you enjoyed watching someone worry. Exactly on time and it becomes, I thought of you, which is the softest kind of power because it feels like comfort while it lands. So Ratatoskr begins to notice prices, not numbers, not shiny things. Just the exchange rates that sit under everything like roots under soil. A little honey buys patience, a little warmth buys silence. A shared hollow buys cooperation that will never be described as cooperation because everyone wants to look independent. A day without being mocked buys a day without planning revenge. And vengeance, Ratatoskr discovers, is often just unpaid attention with extra steps. Like sending an angry letter and calling it closure. The tree doesn't do closure. The tree does ongoing. Some beings still try to make the accounting visible. Dwarves, for instance, would probably love the idea of forged favors. Picture a small iron token stamped with one emergency shelter and valid, through winter, and do not chew. Ratatoskr would chew it immediately, of course, because rules are also a kind of invitation. But favors do not behave like iron, they are soft. They warp, they get retold. Ratatoskr has watched the same act of kindness become 3 different stories depending on whether the receiver felt love that day or merely tolerated. That is the trouble with feeling. It is the most common currency and also the most unstable exchange rate. Even gods can be strangely petty about this. You might think that a god, living in a hall with a roof and a reputation, would not care about small slights. But power does not remove feelings. It merely gives feelings nicer furniture. Ratatoskr has seen a whole week of tension grow out of someone not saying thank you in the right tone. He has watched an eyebrow become a political statement. If you have ever been in a group chat where someone replied with a single period and then vanished, you already know how low-effort drama can still be extremely effective. The gods are old. They have had a lot of time to perfect it. Ratatoskr is not innocent either. He likes honey. He likes warmth. He likes being offered the inside of a hollow instead of the edge, where wind can reach in and touch your ribs. He likes it enough that he sometimes does the quiet math in his head. How much is comfort worth today, and what will it cost tomorrow? He never asks out loud. Asking out loud is how you get labeled greedy, and greed sticks longer than sap. Instead, he accepts payment sideways, the way small creatures often do. A bit of honey left by accident, a warmer place offered because it's no trouble, a compliment that seems casual but arrives exactly when his paws are tired. It is amazing how often no trouble is the most expensive phrase in the forest. This gently is where the petty wars begin, not with axes. With crumbs, with who got the first lick of sweet sap, with who was allowed to rest one paw length closer to the warm center of a hollow, with who was addressed by a name that implied respect instead of a joke. A nest is not only a nest, it is a location. It is leverage. It is proof that someone trusted you enough not to push you out during the night. And Ratatoskr has learned the fastest way to invite conflict is to make someone feel replaceable, because replaceable is cold, and cold makes everything sharper. So sometimes he slows a quarrel down for a crumb. Literally, he takes a sharp insult, carries it in his mouth, and lets it soften a little on the way. You stole from me becomes maybe you didn't notice. You owe me becomes I remember. This is not virtue. It is maintenance. Moss grows whether you approve of it or not. Better to choose where it grows. Better to keep it from swallowing the whole trunk. Ratatoskr may be small, but he understands the appeal of a quiet house. If the house stays quiet, everyone sleeps. If everyone sleeps, fewer grudges stay awake inventing new shapes. And then sometimes he does the opposite. For a nest, he speeds a warning. For a nest, he becomes urgent because urgency is also a currency, and if you spend it well, it buys you a calmer morning. Ratatoskr knows which messages can sit a little longer and which cannot. A bruise to pride can cool overnight. A crack in trust, left alone, can widen into a place where cold air lives. Ratatoskr does not like cold air and cracks. Cold air makes wood brittle. Brittle wood snaps. Snapping is loud. Loud wakes everyone, and waking everyone is terrible for business, emotional, or otherwise. Debts gather like moss, soft, persistent, and surprisingly hard to remove without tearing something important. They gather in shade. They thicken where nobody cleans. Ratatoskr can see them in the way greetings get shorter over time, like a rope cut one fiber at a time. He can see them in the way warmth is withheld, just slightly as a reminder that warmth has a price. He can see them in the way someone laughs too quickly, as if paying interest on a smile. Sometimes the tree feels like one enormous customer service desk, where everyone insists they are fine while quietly filing complaints in their heads. Sometimes he finds the moss in himself. He remembers who paid. He remembers who begged. He remembers who pretended not to need either. He tells himself he is simply doing his job, which is the oldest lullaby any worker has ever hummed into the dark. Doing the job requires memory. Forgetting makes you less useful. Being less useful makes you colder. So Ratatoskr remembers so hard that memory becomes a tool, and tools can build shelters or scrape bark, depending on the angle of your paw. The same fact can be a blanket or a weapon. The difference is timing, tone, and how much you enjoy watching someone squirm. Ratatoskr likes to believe he enjoys squirming only in a very small, tasteful dose. You do not need to shout about a dead to make it hurt. You can mention it gently at the wrong time, like slipping a pebble into someone's shoe and then smiling politely. Ratatoskr has watched this happen between gods and giants, between spirits and beasts, between beings so old they should be bored of keeping score and are tragically not. Keeping score is a hobby you can do while sitting down. You can keep score while preening. You can keep score while yawning. The body may rest, but the mind can still tally. I gave you that once, the mind whispers. I did that for you, it murmurs, and then it pretends it is being generous by not mentioning it. Yet. So Ratatoskr invents a small ritual for himself, because rituals keep the mind from chewing the same thought until it turns sharp. When he receives a favor, he imagines placing it in a jar. A jar for sweet things, a jar for warm things, a jar for uncomfortable things that you don't want to stare at right now. The jars are imaginary, but imaginary containers do real work. They keep the night from spilling all over the floor. They give the brain something to do with its hands, even when it has none. And Ratatoskr, trudging up and down the bark, likes the feeling of turning chaos into something that can be shelved. If you are listening and your eyelids are heavy, You can borrow that without owing anyone anything. Put the day's little exchanges in a jar. Put the moment you felt slighted in a jar. Put the moment you felt cared for in a jar. Label them or don't. Ratatoskr would label them because he enjoys systems, and because labels feel like control, and control feels warm. But even he knows you can sleep without perfect organization. The tree sleeps while carrying worlds. You can rest while carrying a handful of small human things, even the sticky ones. Out on the trunk, the trades continue. A raven glides past with the calm authority of someone carrying news, and Ratatoskr thinks about how ravens are paid. They are paid in attention. They are paid in the satisfaction of being overheard. Ratatoskr is paid in honey and hollows and the privilege of not being eaten. Different professions, different benefits packages. Still the system holds because everyone wants something and everyone tries very hard to want it quietly. Like a polite person in a bakery pretending they are just looking while staring at the cinnamon buns. The eagle at the crown likes respect. Nayega at the roots likes fear. Ratatoskr lives between those two currencies with his own small appetite for comfort and mischief. He learns to offer praise in a way that sounds accidental. He learns to deliver a warning in a way that sounds like he just happened to mention it. He learns above all that asking for payment directly makes everyone suddenly remember they have somewhere else to be. So he takes payment sideways and keeps running, letting the tree's soft economics keep turning like a slow wheel, never quite stopping, never quite admitting it is a wheel. And as the night deepens, even the petty wars loosen. Not because anyone becomes wiser, but because tiredness is its own treaty. The sharpest insults grow heavy. The strongest grudges yawn. Ratatoskr delivers fewer edges and more simple facts. He holds his memories like small stones, present but not pressing. Sap rises in slow increments, twigs tick. A root shifts as if the tree is dreaming of movement and then deciding, politely, not to bother. Somewhere above, the eagle preens a little calmer. Somewhere below, the dragon chews a little quieter. Ratatoskr runs and runs again, each step another tiny entry in a ledger no one will ever read, because the reading happens in real time, in glances and pauses, and the way bodies choose whether to tense. The night keeps talking without raising its voice. The tree keeps holding everything, and the debts, soft as moss, keep drifting into the background, not solved. Not erased, only carried more gently as the bark cools and the warm hollows keep their small, patient promise. After Ratatoskr has done his long errands, after the last insult has been delivered with the careful softness of a wrapped glass, something very old begins to do what old things do. It responds slowly, not with words, not with applause, just with the small, bodily answers of a living tree that has carried 9 worlds for so long, it no longer feels the need to comment on it. You can almost miss it if you're listening the way you listen before sleep, when your mind is still curious, but your eyelids are negotiating. A thin line of sap rises a little higher than it did earlier. A twig ticks once, as if testing the idea of effort, and then decides it's fine. Somewhere far beneath the bark, a root shifts with the patience of an animal adjusting its weight without waking anyone. If you imagine Yggdrasil as a grand cosmic symbol, it's tempting to picture it as dramatic and glowing and busy with prophecy. But in practice, a tree is a tree, and its personality is mostly a preference for routine. It likes to keep doing what it was doing. It likes to keep the same rings, the same slow pulses, the same internal calendar that measures time and weather and weight. That's the gentle joke of it. This world thing, this enormous axis of everything, still does the ordinary work of wood. It still holds moisture. It still creaks when temperatures change. It still has to decide where to send sugars, like a very ancient manager shuffling resources without making eye contact. So when Ratatoskr's little political tour ends, when the gossip jars have been opened, and the air has absorbed the meanings. Yggdrasil's first response is not to punish anyone or bless anyone. It simply breathes in its own way. Sap rises, not like a dramatic tide, but like a warm thought returning to a cold room. The bark tightens in some places, loosens in others, and all of it happens with the calm inevitability of someone smoothing a blanket over a bed. You can picture it as the tree's version of paperwork. This insult goes here, that apology goes there, this favor gets stored as warmth in a hollow, that debt gets tucked into a knot and forgotten on purpose. High above, at the crown, the eagle does what the eagle always does. It watches. Watching is its job description, its hobby, and possibly its love language. The eagle is large enough that it can afford to be quiet without seeming timid, which is a useful skill. It preens a little slowly, with the deliberate care of someone grooming not just feathers, but the idea of authority. When the tree shifts, the eagle feels it first, and if the eagle feels calm, everyone else gets a small discount on anxiety. The funny thing about power is that it's contagious, even when it's silent. A calmer eagle means the air up there steadies. A steadier air means fewer frantic wing beats. Fewer frantic wing beats means the whole crown can pretend it is a peaceful place, at least until the next rumor arrives with muddy paws. Down below, at the roots, knife chews. Chewing is a kind of meditation if you do it long enough. It's also a kind of complaint. The dragon's teeth make a low, dependable sound against the old wood, a sound with no surprise in it, which is exactly the sort of sound that lulls wakes into sleep. If the dragon chews a little quieter tonight, it's not because it has become kinder. It's because even bitterness gets tired, and tiredness is the closest thing the worlds have to diplomacy. The root system shifts again, a slow animal movement, and the chewing changes angle. Less grinding, more drifting. Like someone turning a pillow to the cool side without admitting they want a comfort. You can feel how the feuds behave when the tree behaves like this. Some quarrels roll over in sleep. They don't resolve. They just stop performing. They curl into themselves, conserving heat, like small fights that realize they can't afford to stay awake all night. Other quarrels coil instead, waiting, tightening, finding a warmer day to unwrap. Those are the stubborn ones, the ones that enjoy being themselves. But even those quiet down a fraction because the tree's slow rhythm is a reminder, you can hate someone tomorrow just as effectively. You don't need to schedule it for midnight. Midnight is for sap and soft sounds and pretending you are not counting who owes you what. Ratatoskr, if you listen for him, is somewhere in the middle levels, where the bark has a particular smell: wet wood, cold air, faint sweetness. He is not making speeches. He is doing a smaller kind of work now. He is recalibrating. His paws are sore in the polite way, the way your feet feel after you have walked too far in shoes that look good but do not respect you. He pauses at a notch that catches wind and leans his shoulder into the trunk. When you lean on a tree, even a cosmic one, you realize something simple. Big things are very good at holding you up. They don't ask questions, they don't advise, they just remain. If you're still awake right now, you can do the same thing with this story. Lean on it. You don't have to participate. You can just let it hold your attention until your attention gets heavy and slides down into sleep. If you want to subscribe, you can do it later when your fingers are not as sleepy as your thoughts, or you can forget. The tree will not be offended. The trunk keeps its own records, and this is where it gets gently strange. You might expect a world tree to keep a library, a grand carved archive, a cosmic ledger guarded by stern-looking creatures with ink stains. But the trunk records none of this in sentences. It records it in growth, in rings, in slight changes of thickness where stress has been carried and then redistributed. The tree's history is not once upon a time. It is, here is where the wind pushed hard for many years. It is, here is where a sap had to reroute because something kept chewing. It is, Here is where a hollow became important and was defended by nothing more than habit and an unspoken agreement to keep it quiet. It is oddly comforting in a way that the biggest record keeper in the cosmos is also the least chatty. If you think about it long enough, it becomes almost modern. Your phone keeps records and files and timestamps. The tree keeps records and cellulose and scars. You scroll. It grows. Both of you quietly store far more than you want to admit. And both of you, if you're tired, will sometimes keep a record simply by forgetting to delete it. Ratatoskr understands this, even if he doesn't have words for it. He understands that repeated tension becomes a groove. He also understands that repeated kindness becomes one too. A path worn into bark, a safe notch, a place where your paws go without thinking because your body remembers being okay there once. Sap rising is not just a plant detail. It's also the tree's way of smoothing things over. Sap fills tiny cracks. It seals. It sweetens. It makes sharp edges less sharp. When Ratatoskr runs, he makes friction. When the dragon chews, it makes friction. When the eagle shifts its weight, friction. Friction is constant. The tree responds with sap, not to stop the friction, but to keep it from becoming damaged. That's a quietly boring kind of cosmic wisdom. You don't remove stress, you manage it. You don't get rid of conflict. You let it cool until it can be carried. Even gods end up living by this, whether they admit it or not, because even gods need a place that doesn't snap. Somewhere along the trunk, you can imagine a little community of smaller being spirits, animals, half-myth creatures with too many opinions settling back into their nighttime economy. A tiny nest is repaired with a thread stolen from somewhere it probably shouldn't have been stolen from. A cone pile is tidied into a shape that looks casual, but is, in fact, extremely intentional. Honey is hidden in a place that only the hider knows, and then, inevitably, someone else finds it because hiding in a tree is mostly a way to create future arguments. Warmth is offered in a tight hollow, and the offer itself becomes a social event. Who was invited first? Who arrived late? Who pretended they didn't want it? It's all very ancient and very familiar, like any group of beings trying to stay comfortable without saying the word comfortable out loud. Ratatoskr passes near one of those hollows and hears a low murmur, not language, just the sound of bodies shifting and breathing and making room. Making room is a weirdly sacred act in a world that's always crowded with meaning. You move your fur, you move your feathers, you move your pride aside for half a second, and suddenly someone else has a place to put their tiredness. There's no heroism in it, which is why it works. Heroism is loud, making room is quiet. The tree, in its slow way, seems to approve of quiet. The bark holds the warm hollow like it holds everything else, without commentary, without ceremony, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. Of course, not every hollow is warm. Some stay cold on purpose. Some stay empty on purpose. An empty hollow can be a message. A cold hollow can be a boundary. And boundaries, as Ratatoskr has learned, are not always dramatic lines drawn in the dirt. Sometimes they are simply the absence of an invitation. Sometimes they are a pause that lasts one heartbeat too long. Sometimes they are the way someone doesn't scoot over. The tree holds these boundaries too, the way it holds knots, not smoothing them, not judging them, just letting them be part of the structure. You can sleep with boundaries. You can rest even if some things remain unsaid. That's another gentle truth the tree offers without ever speaking it. Up in the crown, the eagle's feathers settle into a neater arrangement. The air becomes less fussy. The little wing snaps quiet down. Below, the dragon's chewing finds an easier rhythm, as if it has decided the wood tastes the same either way, and there is no need to rush toward bitterness. Ratatoskr, in the middle, feels the tree's steady pulse and lets his own thoughts slow to match it. You can do the same. If your breath is still busy, you can let it borrow the tree's pace, slow rise, slow fall, like sap traveling where it needs to go, not hurrying, not proving anything. And the funny, mildly absurd thing is that this is how the world holds together night after night, not by victory, not by insight, by maintenance, by tiny adjustments, by sap sealing what could become a crack, by creatures getting tired and choosing, temporarily, to stop sharpening their words, by a messenger squirrel deciding to soften a sentence before delivering it, simply because he doesn't feel like dealing with the consequences of sharpness right now. The tree answers back, but only in the language of staying intact. So the trunk keeps recording, not in stories, but in growth. A little thicker here where weight is carried, a little smoother there where a rubbing has become familiar. The bark scent changes slightly as the night cools. The wind finds fewer places to whistle. Feuds drift into background noise. Favors sit quietly like jars on a shelf, labeled or unlabeled, waiting for some future hand to reach for them. And if the story feels like it could continue forever, it's because the tree does. It continues with no announcement, with no ending, with only the soft insistence of living wood and the sleepy, unhurried motion of sap rising into the dark. If you stay with the tree a little longer, you start to notice that messages have a temperature. Not the obvious kind, like hot or cold in your hand, but the softer kind, the kind that sits in the chest and makes you breathe a little differently. Ratatoskr knows this in the same way a squirrel knows which branch will hold him without asking. He has carried words that were sharp enough to cut, and words so warm they could have been used as a tiny blanket. The strange part is that both kinds weigh almost nothing, and yet they can make the whole world feel heavier or lighter, or simply more awake than it wanted to be. So after the run, after the up and down, after the crown air and the root dark, there is a calmer habit he keeps. It is not a heroic ritual. It is closer to what you do when you put things back in the right drawer so you want to hate yourself tomorrow morning. He imagines 2 jars because jars are easy. Jars are quiet. Jars do not argue with you. In one jar he keeps facts, short and exact, as if they are small stones you can stack without wobbling. In the other jar he keeps heat, which is not a fact, but is often what people mean when they pretend they're only discussing facts. He keeps them separate because mixing them makes a mess, and Ratatoskr has enough mess already. He is a messenger, not a mop. The fact jar is simple. Who said what? Who heard it? Where it was said? When it was said? And if you listen closely, you can hear how tidy that is, how it almost sounds like a lullaby, who, where, when. And then your mind starts to yawn because it likes patterns. The heat jar is less tidy. It holds tone and hunger and pride, and whatever a creature was trying to hide under the sentence like a mouse under straw. The heat jar is the reason a calm statement can still start a fight, and why an insult can sometimes land like a compliment if it arrives. On the right day at the right hour, when everyone is already too tired to sharpen their teeth. Ratatoskr is not a philosopher, but he has done enough deliveries to learn the small mechanical truth of it. The way a message travels becomes part of the message. If it arrives breathless, it brings breathlessness. If it arrives slick with panic, it spreads panic. If it arrives slow, with steady pause and an unhurried tail, it can make even a nasty sentence feel less urgent, like a complaint you can postpone until morning. This is not moral wisdom. It is logistics. And logistics, as it turns out, is one of the quiet forces holding the worlds together, right alongside sap and habit and the decision to lie down instead of pacing. If you imagine Ratatoskr's oath, it would not be carved into stone. It would not be shouted. It would be the kind of oath you keep with your body, a set of tiny rules you follow because they make things easier and because you have learned through personal experience that chaos is loud. So he keeps it simple. Cut the tail to the truth you can sprint with before breath runs out. That is the first line. Even if he never says it out loud, your lungs are not infinite. Your patience is not infinite. Neither is the attention of eagles or dragons, and those two have even less interest in your nuance than you do. He practices trimming the way you might practice breathing before sleep. In and out. In and out. A long version of the story is delicious, like stew, but a messenger cannot carry a whole pot. A messenger carries spoonfuls. A messenger carries the part that fits between two heartbeats. Ratatoskr learns to taste a sentence and decide what can be left behind without changing the flavor. Sometimes he removes an extra adjective, because adjectives are often where you hide your vanity. Sometimes he removes a name, because names are flammable. Sometimes he removes the part where someone sighed, because a sigh can be interpreted as an entire argument if it arrives in the wrong place. It is almost funny, in a dry way, how much of diplomacy is just editing. If Ratatoskr had a tiny desk and a tiny candle and tiny reading glasses, he would still end up doing the same work, cutting, smoothing, folding words into a parcel that won't leak. Perhaps that is why he keeps imagining jars. Jars suggest careful lids. Jars suggest that you can close something and carry it without spilling. He does not always succeed, of course. Some words are so lively they climb out of any container. Some emotions foam, some resentments ferment. But trying still matters because trying is quieter than giving up. And while he does that small sorting work, the tree hums. Not in a magical, choir-like way that would make you sit up and say, "Oh, I'm hearing prophecy." It hums in the way large wood hums when wind brushes it, when fibers settle, when sap finds a root. It is a background sound, a steady note that makes everything else feel less sharp around the edges. If you are listening right now, you can let that hum be your metronome. You can let your thoughts match it. You can let your eyelids grow heavier at the same pace the tree keeps being a tree. Somewhere high above, so high you don't have to picture it clearly, the eagle shifts once and then settles again. The shift changes nothing and changes everything, because when a creature that large decides to be still, it feels like permission. Somewhere low below so low you don't have to picture that clearly either. The dragon's chewing becomes less enthusiastic, not benevolent, just less interested in showing off its anger. The worlds have their own rhythms, and at night those rhythms prefer maintenance over performance. Even petty wars like to nap if they are given the chance. Ratatoskr, meanwhile, is in the middle where most life happens, not in the shining heights, not in the deep dark, but on the trunk where bark is practical and the air is breathable, and you can stop for half a second without falling off the cosmos. He finds a familiar notch and rests his paws. He listens to his own heartbeat, not in a sentimental way, but like a runner checking whether the pace is sustainable. It is, mostly. He has done this run enough times that his body knows the shape of the route. His claws know the grip. His tail knows how to balance without drama. He has become, in his own small way, a steady system. And that steadiness is the secret part of the oath. Arrive, deliver, leave. No lingering at nests that like your name too much. No soaking in praise. No feeding on attention. Ratatoskr has learned that if you linger, you become part of the story, and then you have to carry yourself as well as the message, and that is far too heavy. He has also learned the opposite problem. If you arrive and start talking like you restain, you trigger all the social machinery. People offer you warmth. People offer you crumbs. People ask questions you didn't come to answer. And if you answer them, you create new messages that you didn't plan to carry, and then you are caught in an endless chain of errands, like a polite curse. So he keeps his exits clean. He delivers, and he lets the words drop into the world like a pebble into water. Then he steps away and lets the ripples do what ripples do. This is not because he is cold. It is because he is wise enough to protect his sleep. Even a gossip runner needs some sleep, and possibly more than most, because his job is basically to stir the pot and then jog away while pretending it as just a coincidence that the pot is not boiling. There are nights when he thinks about stopping, not dramatically, just practically. What if he simply curled into a hollow and refused to run? What would happen then? Would the eagle and the dragon just talk to each other? Would the crown and the roots negotiate directly like adults? It's an amusing thought, and then he imagines it for 2 seconds longer and realizes the answer is probably no. They would not talk. They would assume the worst. They would fill the silence with their own interpretations. They would invent new insults to explain the lack of delivery, and the tree would have to carry that unnecessary weight. So Ratatoskr sighs very quietly and accepts that his job is not glamorous, but is, in a tired way, essential. The world does not always need heroes. Sometimes it needs couriers. This is where the oath becomes cozy instead of noble, because a courier's oath can be made into bedtime advice without anyone noticing. Keep facts in one jar short, exact, carryable. Keep heat in another cool, labeled small. If you must carry something heavy, do it in smaller trips. If you must deliver something sharp, rapid. If you are tempted to add extra drama, remember you are not a bard. You are not a skald composing for an audience. You are not trying to win the room. You are trying to get from here to there without falling, without spilling, without turning your own nervous system into a loud instrument. Ratatoskr sometimes thinks that the gods must have their own messengers too, and perhaps they do. Ravens for Odin are said to fly and bring news, and that sounds impressive until you consider how exhausting it would be to have a boss who expects constant updates. Imagine being a raven and having to report on the entire world every day. Imagine the meetings. Imagine the emails. Ratatoskr is suddenly grateful for her simpler route. Trunk, crown, roots, trunk again. A loop that can be memorized. A loop that can be run half asleep, which is, honestly, the goal in these worlds. He finds himself thinking about runes sometimes, because runes are a sort of message that sits still. A rune is a word that decided to become a mark. That's a very peaceful idea, if you think about it. Your thought becomes a scratch on wood or stone, and then you don't have to keep explaining it. It just stays there, quietly existing. Ratatoskr, however, is the opposite of a rune. He is a moving mark. He is a message that refuses to settle. He carries words that could have been carved, but instead they travel, they breathe. They change slightly with every delivery, because even when you try to keep a message exact, living mouths and living ears will always add a little extra. That is why the oath includes another silent rule. Deliver, but do not decorate. Do not add your own sparkle. Do not add an ironic eyebrow to the sentence, even if your face is very capable of irony. Do not add commentary like, well, that's what they said, because that turns the delivery into a performance, and a performance is fuel. If you are trying to lull the worlds into a lower temperature, you do not throw extra firewood into the situation, even if the firewood is funny. There is a kind of humor that remains allowed, though, and Ratatoskr uses it the way you might use a soft pillow under your neck. Quiet, practical humor. Humor that reduces friction. If an eagle is looking stern, Ratatoskr might choose a word that makes the sternness feel less like a weapon and more like a posture someone is stuck in. If the dragon is chewing with particular silk, Ratatoskr might shorten the message so the dragon has fewer syllables to chew on. These are not jokes for applause, these are jokes for survival. The kind you tell yourself when you are carrying something awkward and you want your nervous system to stay calm. And over time, the oath becomes less about what he says and more about how he moves. His claws fold when he rests. That matters. Claws folded means, I am not here to dig in. It is a body language promise, like putting your hands on your own knees so nobody thinks you're reaching for a weapon. His tail becomes a blanket when he stops, and that matters too. A tail blanket says, I am not leaving in panic. It says, "This is a pause, not a threat." It is astonishing how much peace can be manufactured just by looking like you are not about to sprint away screaming. You can borrow that as well if you want. You can fold your own claws, metaphorically or literally. You can let your shoulders drop. You can let your breath become the kind of delivery that doesn't spill. And for 4 out for 6, Ratatoskr likes that rhythm because it matches climbing without rushing, and because it persuades the body, very gently, that we are not being chased. You do not need to be chased tonight. The story is not chasing you. The tree is not chasing you. Even the dragon is mostly just chewing like a grumpy old machine. You are allowed to stop running. The world tree keeps answering back in its quiet ways. It does not speak. It does not congratulate Ratatoskr for his professionalism. It simply continues. Sap rises where it must. Roots hold where they must. Branches flex where they must. Rings deepen, recording stress and weather and time, and none of it is turned into a headline. That, perhaps, is the most soothing thing the myth offers. The universe can hold complexity without narrating it loudly. It can carry feuds and favor and moving words without needing to turn everything into a dramatic lesson. Ratatoskr, if he had to summarize the oath in a single sleepy breath, might say something like this: travel light. But even that is not entirely accurate, because sometimes you can't travel light. Sometimes you are handed a message that is heavy, not because it contains many words, but because it contains a relationship. Relationships are dense. They are like wet cloth. They carry weight without looking like much. When Ratatoskr receives a message like that, he does not pretend it is easy. He simply adjusts his grip. He takes a shorter path. He rests once more. He keeps the fact jar sealed. He keeps the heat jar closed, labeled cool. He delivers without spilling as best he can, and then he leaves, because staying would only add his own warmth to the heat, and that would not help anyone. And then, because night is night, the tree hums again, steady and low. The air in the crown softens. The air near the roots becomes less sharp. The trunk holds the metal like it always has, a long column of ordinary wood, doing extraordinary work without making a fuss about it. Ratatoskr's paws find their familiar notch on the bark. His breathing slows. The who, where, when of the fact jar settles into the quiet pattern of a lullaby. The heat jar sits beside it, not empty, but contained, the way you contain a warm drink so it doesn't spill in bed. If you're still listening, you can let the last thought be small. Not a conclusion, not a moral, just a small image. A squirrel with tired paws and careful habits, wrapping a message like a tiny parcel, choosing the quiet route, not because he is noble, but because the worlds are easier to carry when you don't shake them. And the tree, enormous and patient, accepting the delivery not with thanks, but with growth, slowly, quietly, continuing, as if it could go on forever, and perhaps it does.